Charles Joyner was more than a faculty member, more than a historian, more than a scholar at Coastal Carolina University. His acceptance of a position in the Department of History in 1980, a role that lasted more than 3 decades, was partially motivated by 2 factors. Horry County was his family home, and it was the location of an area he very much wished to study, Waccamaw Neck, which became the landscape and the foundation for his groundbreaking book, Down by the Riverside, a South Carolina Slave Community. Joyner's scholarly reputation and the regional university's profile grew hand in hand during his tenure at Coastal, each bringing accolades and recognition to the other.
It wasn't a dream come true in the sense of something I had dreamed about and wanted to do, but I look back on it as something that was really a calling to grow up here and be able to come here in almost mid-career, able to fulfill my career so well here, to see the faculty around me develop into this faculty that's around me now, that I'm just proud to be part of this department and in general of this university. It's been a very happy experience, and one that means, on one level, any place that I was a happy experience, I would be pleased with. But because my roots are in this county, it means so much more to me to be able to do this at home.
Joyner's colleagues in the Department of History were gratified to have a historian and scholar of his caliber in their midst. But most importantly, they valued his friendship. Charles Joyner was a name in the history profession, particularly Southern history. And he knew everybody. By that, I mean all the other Southern historians who had national reputation, some of them even international. Through Chaz, I was able to meet many of them that I never would have known otherwise.
I was intimidated, might be the wrong word, but I was certainly, it was the revered Chaz Joyner, so I didn't know what to expect. Chaz was the warmest, kindest, most humble guy to meet. He came to you like a member of his extended family.
Actually, it was very interesting because to have all of the accolades and titles that he was a very humble person. You know, he traveled a lot, and whenever you saw him, he was always very cordial. Whatever assignments or help he needed, he would just tell you what he needed, and then he would just leave it up to you. He was not a person that rode your back or any of those things. He basically respected and had confidence that whatever he needed would be done, and he could just move on to the next project that he was working on.
In the classroom, Joyner demonstrated still other gifts, passing on his techniques for engaging students to other professors.
It's from Chaz that I first heard the term student-centered learning, or the first use of the term experiential, or the first use of the concept of the Oxbridge system, where you lay a great deal of responsibility onto students, regardless of whether honor students are particularly noted for being real good. And it either works or it may not work. And he taught me to not worry too much about those many times that it doesn't work.
The scope and depth of Joyner's professional scholarship, in addition to his intellectual curiosity on a wide array of subjects, was a source of wonder to many of his colleagues. Yet his prolific learning about Southern history and culture didn't stop him from learning about his colleagues as well.
Dear Eric, I see you're from Catholic University. He had gone through my entire bio, knew where I got my degrees from. He goes, you know, there was a pianist from your university, Don Shirley, a jazz pianist. I loved him. I said, who's that? And so I instantly knew, one, whenever I talked to him, I had to know what I was talking about. I had to have done my research. And then two, how just he was so humble. He would always say, Chaz, Chaz. I would say, Dr. Joyner, Chaz, you know. And so that was just to me, amazing that someone could be so humble and yet have done so much.
First of all, he had 2 PhDs. Very few people make it through that. He had a PhD in history and a PhD in folklore that he got from University of Pennsylvania. He was on a sabbatical one year, and so he got another PhD, you know. Jeannie, his wife, teased him about it because she said, you got a second PhD in the only field that pays less than history.
In the Gullah Geechee culture, we always say that the ancestors were moving people around on the chessboard. And Joyner came, I came, and I'm sitting in my office one day over in the old School of Humanities and Fine Arts, and he comes up and he announces my name. And I said to him, I'm Veronica. And he says, I heard that there was a Gullah person on campus who on the faculty, and I want to meet you. And so that started our friendship. And we had our relationship really kind of had a unspoken connection because we knew we were doing the same work. Different levels, different disciplines, in different directions. But he knew, after interviewing and working with the Gullah Geechee people, he knew that they believed generally that everything comes together in its own time. And I always said to him, I said, you just wanted to come and see what a Gullah person looked like. So I'm it.
You know, one of the best historians in South Carolina is right there, Coastal Carolina University. He won't leave. And so I looked Chaz up when I came, and we became very close friends, very close friends. He was an easy guy to be friends with. He had so many interests and talents.
Charles can write, he can sing, he can play instruments, he can draw. I'm not sure anything he cannot do, and do well.
Chaz was not just a historian. He was an anthropologist. He was a musician. So Chaz has all these different fields to draw on, and he would somehow bring those things into the conversation, and you'd look at things in a different context often when he finished. His famous address when he became president of the Southern, as part of his presidential address, he sang. And this was a shock to probably the majority of the people in the room. But if you knew Chaz, Chaz was apt to break into song at any moment.
I was born in Carolina, down by the sea, in the northeastern corner in the county of Oreen, where the gentle summer breeze blows through the oaks and pine. Carolina, low country on my mind.
Joyner's inclination toward building relationships and seeking out those involved in his interests extended off the campus of Coastal Carolina. In his field work and his research, he was interested in human interaction. Down by the riverside was the result of years of work visiting local areas, such as Sandy Island, Bucksport, and Plantersville in Georgetown County. In pursuing his work and the scholarly questions that prompted it, his genuine and authentic interest in people was the quality that allowed him to succeed, and it also yielded benefits to scholars that followed him.
Everything that I do, I'm building upon his work. He had gone to Sandy Island already and had transcribed a sermon there and songs there. And so I have that record there to kind of use. It's important to kind of note that Coastal Carolina University has respect in the Gullah community because of Charles Joyner. That's opened so many doors for me and for everyone else who comes.
A lot of it relates directly to Sandy Island. Chaz told me it took him a long time to gain the confidence of the people who live there. He just couldn't walk in as some academic and say, I'm going to write a book about you. He had to gain their trust, and he did that. And out of that came Down by the Riverside.
In telling the story of the Gullah people, Joyner changed the conversation altogether.
Joyner kind of gave respect to the narratives. Prior to his book, academics thought that these narratives may have been faulty because these people had been interviewed at a time when it was very tenuous for them in American society and culture. So a lot of people thought that they wouldn't tell the truth. But when Joyner used that information and put it together in a narrative that made told the world the slaves made, it really did, it brought it all together. It just made it click.
Transformative, big book, epochal, watershed. You run out of words that haven't already been used, but as one who's taught history at 6 different places, there simply is no book quite like it, where we had pushed the idea of the victim slave about as far as you could. He showed, well, they're not Sambo. They have an identity. They have a culture. The culture was not destroyed. You won't find the pure African artifact, you won't find the pure African even word, but you will find his concept creolization. And you will find that they make as much impact on the white people in the area as the white people make on them. And that the whole thing is, as he often liked to express it, you will find more the same in us, and despite the many wars over the differences in us.
Joyner spent the next 2 decades of his career continuing his innovative scholarly study of folk life, music, and Gullah culture, publishing volumes, presenting papers, and hosting conferences. His work as a catalyst for an entirely new academic field of study, one that will continue to grow and evolve at Coastal Carolina University through the Charles Joyner Institute for Gullah and African Diaspora Studies.
I think what this institute would do is further that storytelling abilities of Charles Joyner. It will take stories that have been told in the past and throughout history and further it in the work of this institute, and then also to allow students to understand the continuum behind these stories, that they just don't end with slavery, they don't end with exploitation, or they don't end with the hard work that we saw here in South Carolina, but it's something that continues into the future. And I think this institute would do a good job at trying to just teach students, share with students, and train students to understand the push behind what people of Black descent did here in South Carolina, but also have done in other places, and continue the story in that direction.
We will draw on this hope, or bring hope, is by allowing the people's voices to be heard and allowing them to be the author of their own lives, the authors of their own lives. And so that's one of the things that Charles Joyner did, is that he brought the people to life. It was not just a story about them, it was their life, they're telling their story, it was them living out loud. And so through ethnography, that's fieldwork, having the students go out and talk to people and experience the community, those stories will continue to come to life.
So I'm really excited about the possibility of bringing this younger generation to the table earlier than it was when we got to the table. Just whatever comes out of it, we don't know, because they're such a creative group of people. The music, the language, the characters in the novels, is just exciting to even think about it.
The Institute, then, is a way to honor and celebrate Joyner's work, continue his tradition of authentic intellectual pursuits, and tell the next chapter of the story.
I think we have an obligation, a responsibility, a challenge. You know, we have this name now, and so it's expected that we will accomplish much scholarship, opening doors, highlighting cultures, bringing people together, all the above here. And I think the thing that I would love to happen at Coastal, it becomes a place that brings in these scholars. You know, other Southern writers of his time, he was, you know, perhaps arguably the best.
Every place has a history, but Chaz had a way of making that history important and making that place all the more important because of his work.
The study of Gullah, the people, the traditions, it's not just storytelling, it's become an important academic experience. And I'm very proud of that. Chaz would be very proud of that.
Joyner's continued presence at Coastal exists in the classroom, the hallways, and in faculty offices. The work of the Institute will ensure that his influence continues to ground and guide the approach to Gullah studies.
I think it's very safe to say that the legacy of Charles Joyner will be the Institute. You know, Charles was a magnificent man who understood relationships with people. He also understood the importance of scholarship in a way that stories could be told.
He certainly did leave a very positive impression on the department that will linger a long time.
So whenever I'm walking around the campus here, whenever a class works well, I definitely feel Chaz's presence with me.